As moms, we may be spending a lot of time taking kids to church, taking them to Sunday school, making sure they're going to their Bible memorization program or all the things because we want them to be good people. We want them to love God. But what does it mean to raise passionate Jesus followers? Wow, that just seems to have some more weight to it, doesn't it? Well, today on the Modern Motherhood Podcast, I'm your host, Julie Lyles Carr, and I'm so excited to welcome Phil and Diane Comer. They've had such a long history in ministry. They've served with Luis Palau. They are now on staff at a church in Oregon. They are lovely, lovely people, now all engaged in the raising of now grandkids. And they have some really powerful things to tell us about what it means to raise passionate Jesus followers.
It's great to be able to talk about this together.
Well, give us a little bit of history about y'all. Y'all have pastored for a long, long time. Phil started off in a rock and roll band, I hear. And tell us about your kids, your grandkids. Just give us a little bit of history on y'all.
Yeah, well, that's a long time ago. Yeah, I thought I was going to be a rock star. Haha. I played in a band for 9 years. I grew up kind of going to what I'd call a liberal church. So I believed in God, but had no clue who Jesus was. And when I was in college, I met the Lord, and it completely revolutionized my life. I found myself within a few years part of this, one of the first kind of mega churches in California during the Jesus movement. And there were 1,000 young people in it, and they were just in love with Jesus and all in. And so that's what I got saved into, and started working with all the music there and getting mentored by some older guys, and pretty soon felt called to vocational ministry. And there was this girl who sang in one of my 100-voice high school choirs that was beautiful, who I'm now married to.
And, that's a good call. That's the way to do it. Yeah.
So I snatched her, and she said yes. And we've been serving the Lord, I guess, for 40-ish years now, and 4 children later. But when we had our first child, John Mark, our oldest son, who's a pastor and an author himself, that was when our whole vision really unfolded for what did we really want for our kids. You know, we had this vibrant faith because Jesus had rescued us, and we thought more than anything, here I am, a pastor preaching sermons and talking to people about walking with Jesus. But if my own kids didn't embrace it, what am I doing, you know? And I don't know, babe, what do you want to say there about that?
You know, we were fresh young believers when we got married. We hadn't been raised with any sort of real Christian heritage or background. So we just somehow assumed that because we were followers of Jesus, that our kids would just be kind of automatically tucked into the fold. And we were shocked to find out that that is not the case, that children have to make their own decisions. And so we looked around at families in our church and leaders and started asking questions, and really realized that this was going to be something that we would need to make it a quest and a calling part of our lives. That this wasn't just going to happen because we brought our kids to church along with us. So that's kind of how it started. Yeah.
Well, give us a snapshot of kids and faith today. I mean, what do we know about the current state of the church and where kids are at in the church, the next generation coming up? I mean, how's it all going?
Well, I don't know. I'm sure you've probably read some of the same statistics I have. Kids that are raised in the church and then bail out when they go off to university, and only half of them come back. And I think there's a lot of truth in those surveys. However, we've been part of these vibrant churches where the leaders are authentic, and the parents, it's not just a Sunday thing, where they're actually walking with God day in and day out, and kids are growing up seeing their parents be the same people they are at home on Wednesday night or Thursday morning as they are on Sunday. When they see that authentic faith, it's attractive. And so, in our church, it's just filled with young people who are seeing, the real thing and are just eager. They want authenticity. When they see it, they're attracted to it.
Yeah. We hear a lot of people talking about the millennial generation like they are, something's terribly wrong with them. And I'm sure that's true of every generation. But what we're really finding is that when they're all in, they're all in. They don't want to do anything by half measure. And so part of the questioning that happens is good, valid questioning. And some of the church needed to change the way we approach things to do a better job of being completely honest about their doubts and honest about their fears. So we are encouraged by this generation of parents who are just pouring themselves into learning what it's going to take to raise their children to really want to follow Jesus.
There's a cartoon that I like that I've seen before where it shows, a teenage guy getting, herded into a police car, and mom is standing back and with dad, and they say to each other, wow, I wonder where his youth pastor went wrong. Like, as if a youth pastor can make the decision for a kid, or is the one responsible for helping a kid walk in faith and walk into all that Jesus holds. How can we as parents begin to change that mindset? That it's not that we are taking our kids to church and handing them off to somebody to be the one responsible, to be the one to equip them for a vibrant faith. How do we change our mind about that? Because in some ways, I think we often feel like, well, we're not the expert. We don't know what to do. We haven't raised kids before. We haven't raised kids to walk with the Lord. Surely somebody at church is an expert. I'll let an expert handle this. How do we get over that mindset?
I think that's one of the things that we're excited. We're being invited to churches now to do this parenting conference, Intentional Raising Passionate Jesus Followers. And that's the first thing we start with. We want to remove all this fear. Yeah. None of us feel equipped. None of us feel like we've got it all down, but we just come alongside parents and bring them all the hope that God wants this for your son or daughter more than you do. And just lay it out clearly. You're the ones He's given these kids to. It says in Psalm 127, they're a gift from God to you. They're not given to the church. They're not given to the youth pastor. They're given to their mom and dad. They belong to Jesus, but they're to be raised by you in partnership with Him. And so we just start off back in Deuteronomy 6, where God tells His children, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. These things I'm commanding you. And He says to the parents, now you teach these things to your children when you rise up, when you sit down, when you walk by the way. And so He immediately turns to the parents and says, this is your calling. And then what did Jesus say? I'm with you always. And so it's this partnership with God where parents then get excited, like, whoa, God is with me in this, and He's given me this child. And I think when they get that vision, and then they understand the church comes alongside to help and to undergird and to reinforce, but that they have this joyful privilege of sharing Jesus with their kids. And then it gets really exciting. We were in Scotland not too long ago, and this one mom came and she just got inspired about being more intentional as a mom. She went home. She had 3 kids, 12, 10, and 8. She talked to her youngest and said, have you ever given your life to Jesus? No, Mommy, I haven't. Well, would you like to? Yes, Mommy, I would. So she goes, with her Scottish accent, we had a sleep on it and a chat about it. And the next morning she accepted the Lord. She came back to church, and I was preaching that day, and she was just beaming. And then about a month later, one of the pastors on staff said, we've had 13 children get led to the Lord since you guys were here, because the parents went home and were just more intentional in talking about the Lord and living it out in their homes. So that's exciting.
That's beautiful. So give me a definition of what a passionate Jesus follower is. I mean, what are we aiming for here? What's the goal?
I'll say one thing and then I'll toss it to my bride. The Apostle John in 3 John 4 says, I have no greater joy than this, to hear of my children walking in the truth. Now, he said that to the church, but I think as a parent, there's no greater joy than seeing your kids walk with the Lord. Your greatest fear is they'll walk away from the Lord. So what is that? Well, your hope and prayer is by the time they're teenagers, the faith that you taught them about and prayed for them over was instilled in their heart, and by then it's become their own. Where they're saying, I don't just believe this because my mom and dad said I should, but I actually realize Jesus is real. He's in my life. And when I read the scriptures, I have a walk with Him. And, we just kind of broke it down to 2 things from Deuteronomy 6 and then some words of Jesus, loving God with passion. You want to talk about that?
Well, when Jesus was asked what's the most important thing about our walk with God, really, I mean, I think that's kind of my mom summary of it. It really comes down to that our kids would love the Lord their God with all their heart, all their mind, all their strength. I mean, they're all in. We call that loving God with passion. And that they would love people on purpose, their neighbor as themselves. And so when it comes down to what we're trying to see develop in our kids is not just some sort of cookie cutter, perfect behavior. That's just not possible. With kids, that's an impossible quest or impossible goal. But with kids who love God with passion and who love people on purpose. And I think maybe better than a definition would be maybe a story, a description, because it's going to look so different on every child. It just like my faith wears and sounds a little different on me than yours would coming from you in your life. So one day when Rebecca she's our second child, our first daughter, she was about 16 or 17. It was a summer, and She had a job at a local coffee shop here in Portland, and I woke up one morning really early, about 4:30 in the morning, to see a light on down the hall, and I thought, uh-oh, somebody's sick. So I got up to investigate, and I went into Rebecca's room, just a perfectly normal teenager doing all the perfectly normal pushing back to her mom and all of that stuff. I got into her room, and I found her propped up in her bed with her Bible laid out open on her knees, and she was there reading her Bible. I asked her what in the world she was doing up so early, and she said, Mom, almost impatiently, I just can't go into work without this. I need this time of reading my Bible to be able to get in there. It's harder than you know, Mom. And it's the only way I'm going to survive is if I spend some time in the Word with God first. That's what we mean by passionately following Jesus. Not perfect behavior, but clinging close, following him and loving him and knowing that he gives that kind of strength to people.
I just love that. I love veering away from definition and going to story. That is just brilliant, Diane. I love that, because I think so often we can feel so ill-equipped as parents, or maybe we were raised in a situation where we know we don't want to do it like our folks did, but then that means, well, then what are we going to do? And so a lot of times we look for those neat formulas or that menu, or if I select option A and I discipline this way and I do this and we have this bedtime and that schedule, we're going to press it all down, compress it, and we're going to end up with some perfect kid. We try to define it too closely. So I love the idea of story. Amazing. You know, it seems to me that a lot of the parenting advice that we focus on has to do with correcting the behavior of our kids. And I think the church has been very guilty of this, where we're always seeking good conduct, or we're seeking good manners, or trying to tell people how to prevent kids from throwing tantrums. How do we get all that sorted out? So yeah, it's important to make sure that we do instill some of those kinds of things in our kids, but how do we make sure that we don't, unreasonably define that or congratulate ourselves that we've got kids with great manners, but they know nothing about following the Lord? Are manners our first mandate, or following Jesus? And, we know the answer, but go ahead.
I think that, as you said, of course, you want to raise children who are respectful. They're commanded to honor their mother and father. All these things need to be taught and reinforced in the home. You want to raise children who are wise, and the biblical definition of the word wisdom is living life skillfully. That's the definition of it. So you want kids that know how to live life skillfully. Well, that gets into all kinds of biblical things: generosity, obedience, humility, how to apologize. And so we cover all of that stuff in our conference. But I think deeper than that is growing up in a home where it's a Jesus-centered home, where you speak to one another the way the Lord would have you speak to one another, things that you watch, honor the Lord, etc. And our kids grew up, I remember we had this big green corduroy chair. It got destroyed with spilled hot chocolate and everything, but we just call it the big green. But for years, our kids, when they were 3 and 4, they'd come walking down the stairs, teddy bear in hand, sleep in their eyes. And there's Diane sitting in the chair with a cup of tea and her Bible open. They crawl up in her lap, put their head, and just lay there for a while she's reading her Bible. And then she goes and makes them a breakfast. So they're just seeing this as part of who you are, of course. And when our kids were old enough to read the Bible for themselves, I made a game out of it. I created this thing called the nub rule: no Bible, no breakfast. But I said, hey, Jesus said, man shall not live by bread alone. And I said, hey, just read Psalm 1, read these 3 verses, mom's making pancakes. And so they saw it modeled in their mom's life. They were encouraged that this is God's made you. He has a plan for you. I think when it's just part of who you are, it's something they grow up. I think that's what Proverbs 22:6 is talking about: train up a child in the way he should go. Sure, they have their own decision to make, but why would they walk away from that? It's when they see hypocrisy in the home and they don't see the real thing, or they see, I say Christian things, but I don't really live it out. That's what I think. Kids are smart, and they can smell that a mile away.
On the other hand, there's no perfect parent.
That's right.
And kids see all your good days and your bad days, your frustrations with each other when it boils over and you get angry. I mean, that's just real life. There's nobody who conducts themselves perfectly at home all the time. We have found that with our own kids, a simple apology, recognizing that what we just did, what we just said, the attitude we were showing was just wrong, asking their forgiveness for us, our disrespect of them, or us not seeing them rightly, is so powerful to change the heart of a child, because that's really what we're talking about. Character goes far deeper than conduct. Our aim, really, our goal is to nurture the heart of our child that he grows up wanting and loving Jesus. If he has great manners, well, that's all the better for his life and his career, but it's not necessarily going to mean a whole lot in his walk with God. We want our kids to go after Jesus, and you can only take them so far. We want to do all that we can to make them thirsty for him.
I think it's A.W. Tozer said, we want them to want him.
Yeah.
I love that. I love that. And Diane, I loved your statement about character goes so much deeper than conduct. And I think often we can get that confused. Such a beautiful statement. We'll be right back with our conversation with Phil and Diane Comer. But hey, I want you to know, you are not meant to do this mothering thing alone. It takes a community, and there's an awesome community available to you through Mops. For over 40 years, Mops has been inviting women into community through the commonality of motherhood, building friendships, and earning the opportunity to share Jesus with them, maybe for the first time. Mops believes that all moms are world influencers and exists to encourage and equip all moms everywhere to live their best lives. Check out mops.org to find a local gathering in your neighborhood. Well, in your new book, Raising Passionate Jesus Followers, I loved this idea that you really call families to put together a plan, a vision for where a family is headed. So what are some of the steps to accomplish that?
Phil and I are not big vision statement people, so we pretty much stumbled upon our vision for our family by accident, it would seem. Because both of us came from good, loving homes, but not homes that would have considered themselves to be followers of Jesus when we were growing up. They wouldn't have really understood what we were talking about. Later, we were really thankful that later both of our sets of parents came to know and love and follow Jesus, but that was later on in their lives. I was in high school when I heard the gospel for the very first time at this great church that I'd been invited to attend, and Phil was in college, like you said, when a friend came and talked to him. So when we held John Mark in our hands, we were terrified, knowing that we didn't know. But we talked about it all the time, just almost obsessed with fear over what would happen if this boy that we were shocked how much we loved him, if he didn't grow up to love and follow this Jesus who had just totally radically changed our lives. And one day we wandered into a used Christian bookstore and picked up a book that really changed everything for us. It wasn't a book about raising children. It was a biography of a man named Jonathan Edwards, who was a preacher from the 1970s, who's probably theology.
Not 1970s.
Or the 1700s.
1700s, there we go.
It was theology I'm not sure we would, be completely up on anymore, but it was really about his family, talking about him as a person through the lens of his wife, Sarah, and their 11 children. And this was a family of world-impacting leaders. There were pastors and missionaries and politicians and influencers, people who were bringing the gospel for generations, were tracked of how they were bringing the gospel into their worlds and in their own unique ways. And as we read this book, mostly I was reading the book, and then reading it out loud. Phil, you have to hear this.
Yeah, the title of the book was Marriage to a Difficult Man. She would read it in bed at night. It was rather strange. But anyway.
Love it. You never know what the Lord can use, Phil. You never know.
That's right.
Yeah, that's right. I know.
So I was reading to him and listening to this story about this family. And as we read, a vision just really did begin to form in our hearts, though I'm not sure we would have had the confidence to call it that at the time. It was basically, might God do something like this in our family? Pretty crazy thought for two new believers with so little background and so little understanding. But that vision led us on a quest to make disciples of our own children, basically, to learn how to ask questions, to go after every piece of wisdom that we could find that had anything to do with that, developing a heart for God in our kids' lives. So I guess the short answer to your question is yes, we need a vision. And the practical side is what we spent years putting together. And so we kind of contained it all in a conference first and now in our book of everything that we could find that made sense to us about how it is that you that you really nourish the soil of your child's heart so that the seed falls on good soil and produces much fruit.
Yeah, like you've heard the phrase, values are caught more than they're taught.
Right.
I mean, they're taught, but they're caught more than they're taught. So we say first, you talk about a passionate Jesus follower, somebody who's first it has to happen in your own heart. I mean, if mom and dad love the Lord and they're walking with him, I mean, the fragrance of Christ is going to be in the house, right? It has to happen in your own heart. Secondly, it needs to be modeled for your children. And then third, it's being intentionally taught to them. So you bring them up in the ways of the Lord and you teach scriptures and you pray together and that sort of thing. So all three have to be true.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So tell us the difference between goals as a family and values, because I could see someone saying, okay, so in this idea of a vision, of a plan, we're going to read this many chapters in the Bible and we're only going to have Veggie Tales. And we could come up with things that are goals, but distinguish for us the difference between maybe what would be good, great spiritual goals versus values, the things that we want to try to instill.
So the way we look at it is, when we teach our conference, we say to the moms and dads, and pretty much people don't come to our conference unless they believe in the Lord and they want to follow him. But what we like to say is you have one goal and many values. Your goal is when it's all said and done, I have no greater joy than hear my children walking in the truth. You want your son or daughter to be with you in heaven with the Lord for all eternity. So you want them to be a passionate Jesus follower. That's your goal, whether they choose to be a PhD or a physician or a plumber, doesn't, whatever God leads them into vocationally, or a mom of 8 kids or whatever, that this is your goal. And to that, it's your highest calling, your greatest privilege to pray for them and to model for them and to work with them, that they would love the Lord with all their heart, soul, mind, and strength. And that they'll hear the same words from Jesus that you want to hear someday. Well done, good and faithful servant. That's your goal. And then there's all kinds of values that you want to pass on, things that are important to you, that you hope that they will embrace.
Right. And we're talking about more than moral values here, but just the way we do life. We all have values. One that cause a lot of clashes between Phil and I, because your values sometimes clash, is I unknowingly being raised in a home where neatness and cleanliness was super important. That was just high on my list of values. I wanted to raise my kids to keep their closets clean. Wasn't terribly successful at that. Whereas Phil's highest value in life, probably with our family, was to have fun. He wanted to have fun vacations and do fun things and call them fun names. So by identifying what's important to us, we have to just watch that our values don't get in the way of our goal. Our goal is to raise passionate Jesus followers. My goal is not to raise sons and daughters who keep their closets perfectly neat. So when we're talking about values, we're talking about being careful that we don't let them supersede the goal of kids who just fall in love with Jesus, and they're going to express it differently. They're going to have their own values. They're going to be a little different than ours in many different ways. But we want those values to be informed by their walk with God, not by whether or not they complied with the way mom likes to do life. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. I love that. And I do think sometimes that the value we have, for example, the clean closet thing. And if you ever crack that code, would you email me fast? Because I have not managed in 8 kids. I don't think I've pulled it up. Maybe one. Maybe I've got one. But I do think it is interesting because sometimes in our zealousness at times to have kids who are well received in our community or who seem to know how to behave well at the Thanksgiving table, we can sort of let go of that goal because we can, you're going to act like this at grandma's and don't you dare. And we forget that we're trying to be ambassadors for Jesus to our kids, because sometimes that value of wanting the best behaved kid at the table can get in the way of that sometimes. Sometimes the higher value is that kid seeing us model patience, is that kid seeing us be a patient teacher to them, and to see us really get a handle at times on our frustration can be the much higher value in reaching toward that goal. You've got a little thing that I thought was so interesting in your new book, Raising Passionate Jesus Followers. Talk to us about your 10-year rule, because we have a lot of listeners who are in the trenches with little bitty ones. They are still, diapers and waking in the middle of the night. They're still nursing. So sometimes a 10-year rule can sound like, what? I'm just trying to get through today's peanut butter and jelly. Talk about your 10-year rule.
Well, the 10-year rule is just a way of making a decision in the moment. about whether something your child is doing needs to be disciplined or if it's something that they're just going to grow out of. Because in reality, as you know, children don't really grow out of much of anything but their clothes, and they do that frequently and fast. So we take an attitude that we see in our 3-year-old, say, or a behavior, and we ask ourselves or we ask each other, what's that going to look like 10 years from now? And that isn't there's no chapter or verse in the Bible for this. This just was a way for us who were surprised at how black and white we thought raising children was going to be so black and white, and it really seems like it's about 99% gray area. So it just helped guide us. Do I need to discipline this? Do I need to train or correct this? Or is this something that is, like for instance, one of our daughters used to get up early every morning, maybe about 4:30 or 5, and come in bed with us. We thought, oh no, we should be making her go back to bed. But at 4 or 5 in the morning, you're so sleepy. It was probably the newspaper boy who woke her up, something about some noise outside her window. And we realized the 10-year rule made us realize, she's not going to be coming and getting in bed with us when she goes to college. So we're okay with this one. We'll just let this one go. But on other areas, maybe your toddler's coming and kicking you to get your attention. That, on the other hand, what kind of drastic measures will he or she be using to get your attention when he's 16? So that would be one where you'd have to start asking some questions, maybe disciplining, maybe paying better attention, or it's just a rule really that speaks to me to be able to give a little bit of clarity.
Yeah, like if your kid, is angry and they say, I hate you, Mom, and they slam the door and run away and you don't do anything about it. And they think, okay, I can say stuff like that and slam doors, and Mom and Dad are just going to let it go because they don't know how to handle it. Well, if you don't discipline that behavior, what will that look like when they're 14 or 15? That's kind of the 10-year rule. Yeah. Just thinking helps you discern which things to deal with and which things not to deal with, right, Dave?
Exactly.
Yeah, I would say mathematically it seems to have sort of an exponential edge to it, right? That, something that's really kind of a non sequitur is probably still going to be a non sequitur in 10 years, but something that is probably going to escalate. By the time you get to a factor of 10, it becomes a completely different story. So I think that's just a beautiful piece of wisdom, the 10-year rule. I love it.
By the time they're teenagers, we're really having to pick our battles. And so some of those things are not going to ever get dealt with if we don't deal with them when they're really young.
The 10-year rule.
The 10-year rule is not in the Bible. But it helps a lot of parents think the whole thing through. Parenting's not an exact science. Wouldn't it be great if there was a chapter in the Bible, do these 10 things, and your kid will be like Jesus, Right. It takes a lot of wisdom and parents, walking with the Lord themselves.
Well, and I know within our parenting journey of 8 kids, I think it's part of how the Lord has kept Mike and I close to him in the parenting journey, because maybe if I did have a chapter that was like, here you go, this is the way to do it, I might not lean on the Lord as much as I should for each of my individual children, the purposes and plan that God has for each of them and their unique personalities. I don't know that I would embrace the uniqueness that he embedded in them if I thought I could reduce them down to a formula. And so I love that you're saying it does take that wisdom. We can listen to other people's stories. We can sit at the feet of people like y'all and learn so much. And at the end of the day, God has made us the parent of our kid. And to be really thoughtful in that and to embrace that well, I think is a big part of the parenting journey. Now, we're in that age now where our oldest is 27 and then our youngest children are 10-year-old twins. So we're still in the thick of it. We are still having to ask the age-old parenting question, but have you brushed your teeth yet? We're still not out of that phase, right? We're still doing that. But for those parents who feel like, I sent my kid to every church camp. I made sure they were at every youth event. And I know I wasn't a perfect parent, but I tried to model for them. And they have walked away. They've just walked away from the church. They've walked away from the Lord. What do you say to those parents who may be listening to this going, well, wow, all I have right now is regret?
And that happens, and it's true. One thing we say to them is, we in our conference, we walk all the way from birth all through to letting go and letting go well, because some parents don't do that well. They try to keep authority on their kids, and their kids are trying to grow up. And so we talk about how to launch them out into the world. And we say, what if your son or daughter isn't a passionate Jesus follower? What can you do? Well, the first thing you can do is pray. And sometimes you think, well, yeah, I'll pray about it. No, prayer changes things. Prayer moves the hand of God. And the prophet Samuel in the Old Testament says this, "As for me, far be it from me that I should sin against the Lord by ceasing to pray for you." So he says that about the people of Israel because he was a prophet of God. So I think as parents, we can pray. And Jesus calls us to keep praying, keep seeking, keep knocking, because you never know when God's going to move on that child's heart. So you need to pray, but then don't slam the door in their face. If by then they know your values, they know the things that they've chosen maybe not to walk in that way. And so you have to walk that line of letting them know of your unconditional love without accepting maybe some of their behavior or choices they're making. So you don't break off the relationship. You stay close. You keep an open home and an open heart, and you keep the relationship close, and you pray like crazy because you never know when things might change. A friend of mine that I serve with, Luis Palau, who's in his early 80s now, he's an evangelist preaching to thousands all over the world. Well, his son Andrew just started partying, college, was total party animal, and just walked away from the Lord. And Luis would write him letters from all over the world. Send him letters. Whenever he was home, he'd go on a walk with Andrew, his son, and Andrew would go, "Oh no, not the walk," and he would just say, "Andrew, I love you, boy, but you're not walking the right way." And he loved his father, but they kept a relationship, and years went by, and then Andrew, at one of Luis's own events, gave his life to Jesus.
Wow.
Luis assumed he was throwing the letters away, and he one day walked in with a box of all the letters that he'd written. So that was a father continually loving his son, writing letters to him over and over and over, keeping the relationship, praying like crazy. And then the day comes, bam, he comes back.
Incredible story. I've never heard that story before. That is amazing. And I know for a lot of us, and for those people out there who are, engaged in ministry, we laugh about it. We call it, PK, a pastor's kid kind of a thing. But I do think there are those that, people who've given their lives in a vocation to serving the Lord who do see their kids walk away. And I think that kind of story is so encouraging. And what wisdom to say, stay in the lane, keep loving them, don't cut them off. When I think about Jesus' story of the prodigal, one thing that always strikes me is that the father did allow the prodigal to go figure it out. We serve a Jesus who goes and rescues the one. We know that. But the wisdom also of letting the kid go, letting them see what's out there, and then to see that child circle back, and as a father to run to them, is such a powerful metaphor for us to remember if we have kids who seem to have wandered afar, to stay in relationship, keep writing those letters from the heart, whether they be in prayer and thought or physically on paper. What a beautiful, beautiful heritage. Phil and Diane, we are so excited about this book coming out. And where can people find the book?
Right now, you can pre-order it on Amazon and Barnes & Noble and everywhere. It's there. And
all the places.
It's just a pre-order right now until it's released.
Tell us about the Intentional conference that y'all do.
Yeah, so this started in our own church. When we planted this church, our son, John Mark, who was 23 at the time, ended up planting it with us. It wasn't anything we'd ever talked about, and he had a vision to reach 20-somethings. He started this Friday night thing called The Way, going back to the book of Acts where the early believers were called The Way. And it started in a college dorm room, moved to our house, and then they put a band with it, and it just kept growing and growing and growing. And all it was they gathered together, they worshiped with passion, they taught the Bible verse by verse for 45 minutes, took communion together, and this thing grew to over 1,020-somethings coming out on Friday nights at our church, and it impacted our church that we planted together in 2004. It was woven into the fabric of it. Well, this went on for 5-6 years, and these 23, 24-year-olds started getting married. A few years later, they're starting to have their first baby, and our son came to us and said, "Mom and Dad, you got to put a conference together because none of my friends were raised in a home, and now they're having kids, and they're like all in at the Way. They became, a lot of them were kids that grew up in a good church, but now they're deciding, yes, I really do believe this, I'm all in, and now they're having their first baby." So we put this conference together at the invitation of our elders and of our son, who I kind of handed the lead pastor role to at that point. And we didn't know what would happen. And we had to turn people away. We had 500 plus people come to the first one. We had to do it again, and 400 more came, and there was this hunger. And then we started getting invited to other churches. So it's just part of our calling right now is to pass on. There's no formula. It's not an exact science, but we share stories and every scripture we could find on raising children. And we talk about things we're glad we did and things we wish we'd done. And we just want to bring hope and help to parents. And so now we just go wherever we're invited, and we get to do it together. This is fun. After all my years of traveling with Louise Palau by myself, now I'm with my bride. So it's really great. We teach together back and forth. And so they get the mom's perspective and the dad's perspective and how you work together as mom and dad in the training of your kids.
Phil and Diane Comer, what an amazing wealth of wisdom and insight and heart. Be sure and check out the new book, Raising Passionate Jesus Followers, and also check them out on their website at intentionalparents.org. Lots of great resources and insight for you there. Hey, connect with me on social media. I'm Julie Lyles Carr on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. And be sure and check out AllMomDoes. Fantastic blog with all kinds of posts with insights and information that you need for this mom journey. And AllMomDoes is also on all the social medias, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter as well. A big thank you to Donna Toti. She's our producer, and to Rebecca Beckett, our content coordinator. They are those fearless souls who help make sure that the Modern Motherhood Podcast comes along every week. Hey, be sure and subscribe, and we would love it if you would give us a review. It helps others to be able to find the Modern Motherhood Podcast, and we would love to welcome them in the journey along as well. Okay, y'all, next week, gold medal Olympian Scott Hamilton. Yes, that figure skater who has so many historic wins and awards next to his name. He'll be joining me with a fantastic message you don't want to miss about why sometimes we should want to come in first. It's a really fascinating conversation, so we'll see you the next time on the Modern Motherhood Podcast.